Hey there, and welcome back to another Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man video, and today we're going to be talking about Episode 7, Scorpion Rising, which is clearly going to follow off from Matt Gargan getting suited up by Octavius into Scorpion, and Camilla Black finding the gang's hideout ready for an ambush. Plus, we have lots of drama in the personal lives of our two main POV characters, Peter and Lonnie, and I think this is the first time I've actually sat down and realised that Lonnie has been a co-main character, on the same level as Peter this season, with his own story arc and narrative that's largely been disconnected from Spider-Man as a whole. I really like how they've done this, and I hope it stays that way as he pushes further and further into becoming a more comic book-esque villain. The previous episode had the really awesome Daredevil versus Spider-Man fight that blew me away and was massively hype, so this one had a lot to live up to. Could they do it? Well, we'll have to wait and see. Let's jump into it. We start off the episode following Peter as he follows Nico through the hallways at school, trying to get her to slow down and talk to him. Surprise, surprise, but it doesn't go all that well. She doesn't speak to him and leaves him on the front steps feeling quite sorry for himself, whilst it's up to Pearl to come and talk to him. Here we check in with her and we learn that Lonnie's not been in contact with her at all since their most recent fight. This in turn prompts a conversation with Peter that's supposed to be about Lonnie and Pearl, but which the narrative clearly wants you to extrapolate onto Peter and Nico. The crux of it is that it isn't Lonnie's place to decide whether Pearl needs to be shielded or protected from what's going on, that they're supposed to be a partnership, a team, and thus by lying to her or shutting her out, he's betraying that trust. I get it there, they're a romantic couple, even if they haven't been going out for all that long in the story. With Nico though, I still don't think that Peter did anything wrong. His role as Spider-Man is supposed to remain top secret for a reason. They're not a romantic couple, they're friends, and I don't think the story plans for them to ever be romantically linked, considering later on that Nico says that Peter's like a brother to her. I just feel like this was a very clumsy analogy, and it didn't really work much for the story later on. The scene ends with Peter running off for his internship at Oscorp, and Pearl getting a text from Dre asking if they can talk. Well, at least she's starting to try to help, I suppose, considering how much of this is legitimately his fault. It's probably a case of too little too late by this point though, and it's going to take more than that for me to not hate this kid. But there's no time for me to keep on hating, because now we're over to Lonnie at the 110th hideout, where things are starting to get serious. They have guns, and they're preparing for more of a gang war than just a brawl in the parking lot. Lonnie at this stage is still shocked by all of this, but Don's really taken him under his wing at the same time. Yeah, I think it's very clear he's in too deep at this point. First, it's going to be about fighting the Scorpions, but eventually, it'll transition, he's going to target innocents or something similar. It just feels like the natural progression of his character arc, that the big friendly character slowly goes past the point of redemption or return. Peter and Norman are up next with a meeting to follow up on the discussion about Octavius. Together, they're using Oscorp's mass spectrometer and satellite to try to figure out what's powering the weapons that Octavius is giving out to random villains, and by doing so, they hope to find trace samples that are going to lead them back to his lab. Since Peter's pretty smart, he rapidly figures out what the trace metal sample is, and what it can be used for, which leads them to Gamma as the energy source and gives them a plan to try to track it down. Honestly, the majority of this scene was just me sitting there wishing I could be this smart. Also, it's lucky that Peter never seems to get brain damage from all the shit he puts his body through. Kid would be a prime candidate for early onset CTE if he was a normal person. I suppose the fact that he has superpowers probably plays into it a little bit. He probably regenerates to a certain extent. But yeah, it'd be a shame for him to lose all that intelligence, all that potential. As the meeting's about to conclude, they get a notification that there's an extreme gamma energy signal on the move, headed towards Harlem. And of course that's got to be Scorpion on his way to whip some ass against the 110th, with Peter suiting up as Spider-Man to try to intercept him and save the day. So at this stage, I'm hyped. We're about to get into one of the big fights of the season with one of the most classic Spider-Man villains. Hell yeah, I'm ready. At least I was. Because instead of getting right to that epic battle sequence, we find ourselves in a nearly 10-minute long Harry and Nico bonding sequence. Nearly 10 minutes after you've been teasing me with a battle between Spidey and Scorpion? That's just mean. That's just cruel. I mean, yes, it's an important story thread, but it isn't exactly what I was gearing up for, you get me? After a bit of a bumpy start at her place, Harry realizes that Nico's hungry, and so they head off to a parking lot building where they share a pizza and talk through everything that's been going on. Or at least they try to. Harry wants Nico to forgive Peter, and Nico's not keen on doing that because she feels like he's leaving her behind to play hero with his new friend, that he's abandoning her. Once again, I'm going to say that I really don't feel like Peter's done anything wrong by not keeping her informed that he's Spider-Man. A superhero is supposed to keep their identity hush-hush. And like I said in the scene with Pearl, it's clear the episode wants to frame it as this big betrayal. But I just don't see it. They're not a couple. It's not the same context. I think this is massively silly. And that would be fine if it was meant to be a silly teenage drama being whipped up over nothing. But I think you're supposed to be in the camp of Peter having done something genuinely wrong, and I just can't get behind that. We briefly catch up with Peter, who's making his way across the city to the source of the destruction, with Norman seemingly starting to get distracted in his search for Otto. After the discussion almost crashes and burns, Harry decides to change tack and invites Nico to try to drive his car to Bond. Learning to drive for the first time in a supercar in the busy streets of New York City is probably not the greatest idea, but it doesn't matter to them. He's rich after all. She bunny hops her way across the city and then gets involved with a street race, which she wins due to Harry's awesome car having a turbo boost mode, but also because her magic amulet activates and saves them from a fiery car crash death. And she's mad that Peter's been hiding things from her, hey? Hey? I hope they end up touching on the hypocrisy of that. Over to Lonnie, he's still lingering at the hideout waiting for something to go down when Pearl turns up ready to rip him a new one. Dre seemingly told her everything and she's come to take him home and help him get a fresh start. One glance at Big Don though seems to be enough to convince him and he begins to disagree with her. We don't get any resolution to that though, because this is where we finally get to the good shit, as out of nowhere Scorpion bursts into the hideout in his new power suit, ready to whoop some ass. This fight is awesome. Scorpion standing in the smoke with the silhouette of the tail rapidly blocking all the bullets coming at him, then him destroying the gang one by one. Bad luck to that one guy who got killed off for dramatic effect. Everybody else just gets their asses beat rather severely, but that guy is dead, impaled. He tears through everybody until he gets to Big Don, who's rescued by Lonnie, who in turn has to be rescued by the timely arrival of Spider-Man. This right here. This is a great fight with a lot of cool story beats playing out. Scorpion slowly getting angrier that his suit, which just defeated the gang in seconds, isn't capable of taking down Spider-Man properly with his webs and whatnot. Meanwhile, Peter's struggling to actually hurt Scorpion at all. It's taking everything he has to dodge him and counterattack. Meanwhile, Norman's clearly getting more focused on pinpointing the location that Dr. Octavius is hiding in, and so he's starting to ignore what's going on with Peter. He's starting to abandon him for his own agenda. Honestly, this first battle, Scorpion vs. Spider-Man Part 1, is a whole lot of fun. I don't think I'd put it higher than Spider-Man vs. Daredevil, which for me was the best fight of the season so far, but still up there for sure. We then wrap up the Nico and Harry subplot, which once again feels like it's there just to cool off the fight scene somewhat and annoy me. I hate to be one of those action bros that only cares about the fights, but I'm really not. If this was an Octavius plot point, or even a scene of Lonnie and Pearl running from the danger and talking about everything, I'd be all for it. Here, it just feels a bit tonally out of place, and like it's taking me away from the good stuff. Either way, what's done is done, and they make peace, with Nico also making it clear that she and Peter are not all good yet. Also, scratch what I said about this being a second tier fight earlier on, because when we come back from that scene to the battle, this is just so good. High octane, good banter, a real sense of peril, Peter getting whooped until Norman starts paying attention again and gives him some advice. This in turn gives Peter a winning strategy, and he webs up Scorpion, but it takes all the web he had left to do so, which leaves him vulnerable. Good thing Norman's still over there on the comms, and Peter's won the day, right? Psych. Scorpion powers up and burns through the webs because he's a psycho who doesn't feel pain and doesn't care if he's burning himself, and then he just unleashes on Peter, who's suddenly outgunned because A, we know he pulls his punches. B, he's run out of web fluid, which reduces his mobility. C, this guy has a super suit and is crazy. And D, he already took a heavy blow earlier, which straight up damaged his mask and impaired his vision. I loved how shocking part 2 of their fight was. First of all, Norman seemingly just forgot that Peter existed and went offline on him, and also to the extent that Peter was getting beaten up. I figured he'd get tossed around a little bit and injured, but this scene goes the extra mile to turn Scorpion, the first real marquee villain he's facing, into a character that's genuinely putting Spider-Man at risk and pushing him beyond what we've seen before. It's a brutal beatdown. And Norman only realizes that fact once the suit's punctured and Peter gets impaled by the tail. Although, to get to that point, Spider-Man did have to do a lot of waiting around. Why did he watch Scorpion pull down the pillar on top of him? Why didn't he dodge? Oh well. I'll be real with you, when Norman rushed out of the office and Spider-Man is just getting wailed on, just getting rinsed, I really did think we were going to see the debut of Green Goblin, but in a heroic capacity at first. That was going to be awesome, I thought. Hell yeah, here he comes. And instead we got the remote-controlled glider, which was awesome, don't get me wrong, and certainly confirms Goblin soon, but at the same time, when you were expecting the Goblin, it ends up being a wee bit disappointing, doesn't it? And I think it was supposed to be. Either way, this scene was epic in every way. I loved it. Scorpion was awesome, hell yeah. Scorpion screaming after him as the glider flies away and he destroys the whole building. That was heavy. I loved it. Excellent episode. And in hindsight, it was actually good to get that Nico and Harry stuff done with all at once, because finishing on that final fight was so good. And so yeah, that's the end of the episode and the end of the video. And I'll just remind you, these will be my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of this episode? Did you like it? Hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.